Good afternoon, perhaps good morning. I welcome our guests from Southern California and from around the world. We believe today that we have people who are tuning in for whom it is also tomorrow from the Pacific. So we welcome you all. I'm happy to have you here for our program with the Getty Museum, documenting Dissent, Los Angeles artists' protest photography. I'm Mary Miller, Director of the GRI, the Getty Research Institute. Here in Southern California, it's just 4 o'clock, and I stand on traditional Tongva and Gabrieleño lands. We live via Zoom more in the world than ever, even as this pandemic begins to wane. We seek to live in this world with awareness of where we are and to acknowledge the power of the visual to bring understanding of the past into our present and future. I'll be turning this panel over to its organizers in just a minute, but let me say a little bit more about work at the Getty Museum. For the reopening, which opened to the public just on Tuesday, Jill Moniz has curated, is a guest curator for PhotoFlux, a powerful exhibition of photographs by 35 Los Angeles-based artists who challenge the ideals of beauty, representation, cultural capital, and objectivity. And I want to add a special thanks to the Department of Photograph's curator, Maisie Harris, and public programs specialist, Greg Sandoval, both of whom contributed significantly to the formation of today's program. I want to look ahead beyond the current opening of the exhibitions at the Getty Museum and to get everyone psyched for Maisie's upcoming show, In Focus, Protest, which will open at the end of June. In no other year have we seen such power of photography and video to propel action and to inspire change. We all know how the 9 minutes and 29 seconds of video of George Floyd's murder changed so many things in our world. Now, to today's program. Focusing on documentation of protests in Los Angeles since the 1960s, moderators Alex Jones and Allissa Richardson explore the practice of protest photography with two local artists, George Rodriguez and Ted Soqui. Ted, native Angelino and photojournalist, I was just at his blog spot, and I really was just taken in by the complexity of his work. And George Rodriguez, also a native Angelino, now I think he's going to be in Whittier today talking to us, was awarded not so long ago with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. And he is known for his exhibition of work at the Vincent Price Museum. Alex Jones is a research assistant at the Getty Research Institute. So he and I are the home team here. And his current research focuses on Blackness and photography in the Charles Brittin archive, which you saw on the holding slide as you were coming into our meeting and gathering today. Dr. Allissa Richardson is on the journalism faculty at University of Southern California, USC, and her recent book, Bearing Witness While Black, African Americans, Smartphones, and the New Protest #journalism, won the Frank Luther Mott Award for the best book on journalism and mass communication in 2020. Allissa, if I may, I turn this now over to you to launch our program.
Thank you so much, Mary. I'm so excited to be a part of this community and to host this really wonderful event where we discuss the importance of images in the decades-long struggle in Los Angeles for racial equality. As Mary mentioned, we have two dynamic photographers and a dynamic curator and scholar who will join us for this conversation. I'll introduce them to you again. George Rodriguez is a photographer with 40 years of experience documenting historical moments and social justice events in Southern California, including the Chicano Moratorium and the 1992 Los Angeles protests. In 2019, his first career retrospective, George Rodriguez Double Vision, was held at the Vincent Price Museum of East Los Angeles College. Ted Soqui began his career covering 1980s breakdancing in Pasadena and the AIDS epidemic for the LA Weekly. His work encompasses events ranging from demonstrations and protests to drone photography of the pandemic, all those empty streets shots that you may have seen. Soqui's photography frequently appear in national and international media, and he produces photo essays for the online platform Capital in Maine. Alex Jones is a research assistant, as was said, in modern contemporary collections at the Getty Research Institute. His current research focuses on Blackness in photography in the Charles Brittin archive. Each of these incredible curators and creators will talk to us for the next few minutes about what it means to take pictures during really drastic times and what documenting dissent has meant to them over time. And so the first couple of things that we would like to do is share some iconic photography with you that has meant a lot to us throughout the years. Some of the photographs that we're going to share are the formative photographs that put us on our path to study what we do, or if you are George and Ted, to shoot what we do. So I'd like to go to the next slide. I'd just like to share with you all two formative slides for me that really drove home what this movement was about. In the first slide that you're going to see of Gloria Richardson is a Marylander, as am I. And in this picture where she is putting up her hand in a rather defensive posture, as a young woman in college, I wondered, who is she? If we could just go back to Gloria's slide. Yes, this is the picture I saw as a young college woman. I was a journalist, a college journalist, and very fascinated with SNCC photography. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was a dynamic organization led by the late John Lewis and lesser known, but equally important, Diane Nash. And I think that one of the things that really took me when I saw this picture is that this native Marylander, Gloria Richardson, is pushing away the bayonet of the National Guard. And we have to remember during the 1960s, it was a tumultuous time, and SNCC, even though they were a nonviolent organization, were often met with violence. So when I saw this picture as a young journalist and thought about how John Lewis and his team knew how to take pictures, to stage that protest, to woo Northern journalists to come down and see what Southern style discrimination looked like. This is one of the iconic photographs, at least on the East Coast, that we tend to remember. It's noteworthy to me too, as I began to study more about how photography was used during protests, that women have always been the centerpiece of some of our more memorable photographs of movements. If we could go to the next slide, I'll show you what I mean. In this next picture, Aisha Evans is standing off with Baton Rouge police officers. And in her protest, which happened in the wake of the Alton Sterling killing, which we have to remember happened back to back with Philando Castile, she told me when I saw this picture, I didn't know what I was being arrested for. The cops walked up to me and they did not say a thing. And when I saw this picture, I was actually abroad. I was studying and lecturing in Italy. And unfortunately, when I saw it on the cover of a magazine, stopped someone who did speak Italian and asked them to translate for me what it was. I immediately thought, this looks like home. And it's unfortunate that those were my first thoughts, but I thought, what happened in the moments that I was in the air and when I touched down? And so the kind person who was running the stand said, Philando Castile and Alton Sterling were killed back to back. And now in your country, there are protests. And I thought, wow, this is a second wave, if you will, of the Black Lives Matter movement, which we thought had died out in the latter part of 2015. And here Aisha Evans is in July of 2016, showing us that the fight wasn't yet over. And so I had to find her. As an investigative journalist, I tracked all of the people who covered her, talked to her, and then I found her in New York and asked if I could have a moment of her time. Her testimony, juxtaposed with Gloria Richardson's pictures and all this really great tapestry of African-American women who've always been at the forefront of protest, really brought me to this moment and to this panel. Today, I really want to talk to you about what it means to create imagery and to drive news messages with pictures. Now, of course, Ted and George may not say that's not what they thought they were doing at the time. It's just kind of a side effect of what they're doing. They were capturing the truth. The iconic moments come later. And as Aisha shares in this picture, she didn't even know she was being photographed, so there was nothing staged about it. And as you'll hear from some of our other photographers, some of the best images that captured tumultuous moments were almost by accident, happened in the heat of the moment, or happened in a moment that they will never forget. And so without further ado, I'd like you to meet our first photographer. Ted will join us first.
Hello.
Hi, Ted. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for
Fantastic.
having me.
Yes, it's so great to talk to you. I think one of the things I'm excited to talk most with you about today is how you have done your work as technology has changed. But before we get to that, I'd like you to share your two favorite iconic pictures that really typify what it has meant to you to be a documentarian of difficult moments.
Okay. Can post up a picture and here we go. So what would you like to know? As a photographer, I could tell you. Go ahead.
I'd like to know what was happening in this picture, and afterwards, when you saw it in the development space, what did you feel? And what do you want us to feel?
Well, this was going on at LAX Airport, International Airport. The airport was about to be shut down by demonstrators over the Trump administration's choice to not allow people from certain countries and of the Muslim Islam religion not to come to the US. So a small group of people formed a protest at the airport to voice their opinions that this was not very American and it just wasn't right. Generally, I start wide, but the protest wasn't that big. So a good way for me to start is telephoto. And it started as a portrait photographer in my early years. And I love portraits. And I just really zoomed in onto this family and their young daughter who made her own sign with her family and had this beautiful light on her and the head. And I got to her level, shoot at her level and took this photo of her. And I don't even think she saw me, but took a few photos. I was just impressed by how engaged she was and the moment. And it's just one of those moments that that's going to be a great photo. At least that's the way I felt.
Yeah, and you mentioned the lighting on her and you mentioned the portraiture. And a lot of these pictures, a lot of your work, it seems like people did not even know that you were there. And I think that's the mark of a real photographer in these moments that can be really emotional. How do you strike that balance between picking a person and being close enough to be intimate and have that intimate shot, but being invisible enough to not interfere with the news that's happening?
It's almost impossible. I mean, as soon as you break out a camera, something in their brain sees it. You may think you're invisible, fly on the wall, but people will pick up on the camera, especially if it's a large camera. You just have to be really patient and almost bore the crowd you're in front where they're just like, oh, it's just another photographer. And then you become the fly on the wall. And then you can capture them, not, throwing their interest at you anymore. So it's almost like a waiting game. Yeah, there's two types of photographers. There's campers and there's hunters. And the hunters will move around, they'll shoot from here, 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 here. But I'm a camper, I'll just sit there, like a bump on a log, and I'll just wait, and I'll wait somebody if they're giving me a bad look or they're displeased with me. And it's like, I try to have my press credential out so they know I'm a member of the press, or, I'll talk to them and say I'm with the press, and or sometimes I'll be really upset that I'm with the press. But most of the time, people are pretty great. I'll just sit there and wait, and I won't move, and I'll just let things happen. And eventually, if you're lucky enough, you'll capture something. But that's how I shoot, as a camper, technically. And I think we have some technical difficulties, but oh. Well, anyway, I spoke to the young girl and her family, and I got her name. Her name was Rosalie, and she was just supporting her family. She wasn't of Muslim faith, but she just decided that she felt strongly enough that she taught their family to come down to demonstrate, and here we are. And there's Alex. Hey, Alex.
Hi, Ted. Let's move on to the next image. If you could give us some context about where this came from, especially because this is one of your more iconic images.
Okay, move to the next slide.
Please.
There we go. So this was, I was photographing the Occupy movement for a while in Los Angeles. It was a pretty big deal out here. We had 3,000 members, and they were camped out over at the LA City Hall. It was like, I'd never seen anything like it. So I would go to these daily. I would stop by the camp and photograph things. And every afternoon, the camp would send out a contingent of people to protest in the city. And this was a national or international day of protest. And the demonstrators went to the financial district in Bunker Hill, and they were protesting against predatory banking, and especially it was the Bank of America, how they were just taking advantage of the 99%, and nobody could really stop them. So they formed a link around the bank, armed link, and there was a bunch of people. Most of the photographers were shooting wide because they wanted to get this link around the bank. And I tried it, and it wasn't a very good photo. It was a long day for me, and I brought out the telephoto. I had rarely do I use two cameras, but I had two cameras, and one with a really long telephoto lens. And I started down the link, and I just like, oh, who's gonna make a great photo? Because I had this amazing lighting bouncing off the buildings. You can see there's no shadows, and it was just, for me, a lot of my photos are lighting and composition and portraiture. So I just go down and say, oh, that's not a great one. And then there was this person right in front of me, and I was like, oh my God, that's a great photo. And then their eyes are moving back and forth, because I had this big giant camera, and I took one photo. I just nailed with one photo. And I looked at the back of the camera, it's like, ooh. And I showed it to my friend, and I said, that's a magazine cover, isn't it? He's like, I was like, that's a great photo. So that's how that went to be. And I uploaded it to the company I was working with, Corvus. It's a photo agency. And they weren't really taking any more of my protest photos. They were kind of overwhelmed, and they weren't really selling very well. But I said, take this last batch, and I'm like, okay, no more. So that one sat on their website for a while, and I posted it on Facebook, and I got a lot of response from Facebook on the picture, even from people that don't respond to me on Facebook. And they're like, that's a great photo. I'm like, it is, isn't it? I mean, I liked it, and it just, from there, it took on a whole different life and became what it was. But, it's a rare moment for a photojournalist and for myself to capture a photo that could be iconic and beautiful and something you're proud of, and something that, you kind of you're good at doing. It's not like an accident, like a plane crash, or some event that's just out of your realm of photography. So that's why I'm really proud of, this type of photography. And
that's great, Ted. And I see that Dr. Richardson has
Beautiful.
joined us again. Did you want to move on to the next image? Yeah.
Absolutely. My laptop overheated there. Yes, and I'd like to go to your photographs, Alex. I think what really took me with your photos, is that they are right in the moment. And again, this intimacy that the subject has with the photographer is incredible. So if we could look at some of your photography that takes us back to the civil rights movement, that will be fantastic.
Yes, I'm sure they're pulling that up now. Yeah, so I'm presenting today briefly on a series of photographs that I've had the chance to do some really close research with in the Charles Brittin archive. And I'd specifically like to thank my colleagues Izota Poji, Sally McKay, and Masa Hatan for their immense support in helping me get access to these materials during what has been a very uncertain year for all of us. As you can see on the screen, the images that Charles Brittin produced were born out of the civil rights era, and he was predominantly doing his photography in the mid-1960s into the 1970s on behalf of the radical organizing group called the Congress of Racial Equality, also known simply as CORE. The images that Brittin produced show, in my opinion, a somewhat haunting portrayal of what civil rights protest really looks like on the ground level. And so these images and the image that you see on the screen were specifically born out of a demonstration that was in early March of 1965 at the Federal Building in downtown Los Angeles. And these demonstrations were in response to what had happened only a few days prior in Selma, Alabama, which is infamously known as Bloody Sunday. And so Angelenos by the thousands gathered downtown because they felt that the response from their own city officials was lacking. And this image here kind of shows you what that looks like in person and what some of the less of the austere understandings of protests and more closely of what that violence really looks like. And I think that this is a kind of really startling image to see this Black man on the ground surrounded by these police officers, his face completely covered. If you can move on to the next slide, we can see more examples of what that photography looks like. According to the reports at the time, the demonstration started as a peaceful protest, but as you could have seen in the last one, it quickly evolved into something that was a violent clash between the protesters and local police. So I've been particularly focused on a smaller series of photographs that featured this unnamed and unidentified Black woman who you see. And I've noted in my research in particular how her clothing, the kind of sophistication of her outfit really works in contrast to the very brutal ways in which her body was kind of excruciatingly twisted and turned by the nameless and also faceless white men who surround her, likely police officers themselves. Next slide, please. These images show not only the kind of regular violence of what I think we've all come to expect from civil rights era photography, but I believe they recast them in this way that shows how viscerally bodies were flung and gripped in the pursuit of racial justice. And particularly give Southern California a role in that history that is often photographed, but not necessarily placed in this locale. And so for my final image, next slide, please. I'm showing you a cropped image from a context sheet that I've had the privilege of looking at in the Charles Brittin archive. And as we can see here, this is the same woman as before, but in my opinion, one of the more heartbreaking and dramatic examples of that protest that Brittin was shooting directly. And we can see the same woman dangling in this crucifixion-like pose, and it gives a very powerful symbol, in my opinion, for how individuals in the civil rights were throwing themselves into the action of protest, the risk that they took, the vulnerabilities that they wielded, and the refusals, I think, that they were displaying to embody this very important claim to racial and social justice.
Wow, Alex, can you talk a little bit about just the disembodied police that are truncated in this photograph? I think what got me most when I looked at these photographs is that this generation can so easily, due to mobile devices, look the aggressor in the eye. And I think that's what shook people to their core when they saw former officer Derek Chauvin, is that he looked directly into the camera and we could kind of look back at him and imagine ourselves in that transfixed, terrified position, unable to do anything but press record, right? But this picture is different because it almost disavows or removes the participation of police in the civil rights movement as stalwart aggressors. So can you talk a little bit about how the framing of Brittin's work kind of takes out some of the shots of the people who are actually inflicting the violence and talk about why maybe he chose to frame it that way?
Yes, I think that's a wonderful question, especially because just as the subjects themselves, the protesters are unidentified, of course, the forces of power and violence behind them are also unidentified. Perhaps this is a great example of the changing attitudes about police violence that we're recording between these images from the 1960s and the images that you're showing in our contemporary age. I think based on my research, it's very clear that Brittin was working specifically on behalf of the Corps. And so it was in his interest as one of their photographers to really give a clear picture, not of necessarily the police, but the victims of that police violence. And I absolutely see where there's been a change in that discourse into now, where we're able to turn the camera around and see both sides of that conflict.
Yes, it really makes me think a lot about old lynching photography, for example, where we could not name the people who were in the group. We didn't have captions underneath. And when newspapers would cover it, they would say that the person died at the hands of parties unknown. So to see this photography kind of highlight that, but also want to show the brutality upon the Black body is really, really interesting. Do you know if he developed a relationship with the mainstream?
So I know that Charles Brittin was trained as a news photographer, not unlike Ted and George here in certain, and he worked for the LA Times early on in his career. So I know, but the interesting thing about Brittin is that because of his explicit participation and involvement with CORE, he was removing himself from the mainstream. And so that act as photographer in this very tumultuous period in civil rights history is very interesting to me, because he absconded from his post as like a news journalist, if only to say, I'm working on behalf of this organization. I think that's very noble of him.
Yeah, I found that very interesting in all your writings about him on the Getty blog as well.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to George next about his work. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.
George, are you there? As he prepares himself, George has some fantastic photographs that he will share with you all about his very long and illustrious career covering the many movements that LA has experienced. Do you want to tell us about this first photograph, George?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are. Hi, George.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that.
No
Anyway,
worries.
this is a picture of the Moratorium March in East Los Angeles, primarily against the war in Vietnam. And what I did, you know, I used to sit in on meetings concerning these events that would happen. So I had a lot of information before, like a march like this. So it went from Belvedere Park to what was then Laguna Park. So that day I parked my car at Laguna Park and then took a bus down to Atlantic Boulevard to march back with the people towards the park. So that's what I did. But along the way, there was just so many people. I wanted to get an overall shot. So I went into a hotel and went up to the roof and shot this picture. And, you know, it's funny, you have so much stuff throughout your career. I never gave a lot of thought to this, but other people that see this, they feel it's very iconic towards that time. And actually that particular day was like a turning point in the Chicano Mexican-American movement because it drew so much attention to the cause. And like I said, people like myself that are involved in covering these events, you know about it, but when something like this happens and makes the news, because it, Ruben Salazar, a journalist, was killed that day, and that drew a lot of attention to the march and to what had happened, and because it ended up being a riot. You know, what was at one point very peaceful, got out of hand, and in fact, I was in a certain area of the park when there was a confrontation with a lot of sheriffs and people in the march. And so my brother and his wife had gone to the park with their little daughter that was 7 years old. So I hurriedly went to them and told them to leave because it was going to get bad, which it did. And then it was total chaos. And whereas people were just sitting like having a giant picnic, listening to people, now they just stood up and they were in the midst of a lot of tear gas and sheriffs, you know, swinging batons. So, but in any case, this is the photo from that day that is most prominent in what I have. Like I said, I was very fortunate to be concerned in this movement. So a lot of these events like the walkouts, I was very much aware of, so I kind of had inside information as to where to go and when to show up. So, so like I said, I was extremely involved here.
You're being modest, George. You have a couple more shots that you'd like to show us that are very iconic. Okay. We could go to George's next slide.
Well, this
tell us about this one.
Well, this is special to me because if you notice, everyone involved here is African American, yet the placards are holding are all in Spanish, which, you know, tells people that it was more than just a Mexican American movement, the United Farm Workers. This is in the midst of the grape boycott, and even that was, you know, rather mild. And I think there's like 6 martyrs that have been killed during the protests involving farm workers. And like I say, that it's doesn't seem like there'd be any violence involved there, but it all has to do with who's in authority. I know that when I was there in Delano, I would often get my picture taken by the sheriffs there, and they said that they had an agreement with Cesar Chavez and United Farm Workers that I didn't take pictures of them, they didn't take pictures of me. But that wasn't true, I found out later on. They had no agreement about that. And I remember getting up early one morning and being followed by a sheriff's car, and they pulled me over and gave me a ticket for going through a red light. And I know that wasn't true. That never happened. But anyway, when I got back to what was Filipino Hall, where people stayed when you went to boycott there in Delano, and I told them what had happened about my getting a ticket, and they said, well, you just started your file with the FBI, which it's hard to believe, but I guess those things happen.
Oh my goodness, how did you take care of yourself during that time, knowing that there was kind of state-sponsored surveillance?
Oh man, that was you took it for granted. You know, I mean, like I say, I was pretty much involved going to meetings, and you come out of a meeting, say out of a church in East LA somewhere, and there's people taking pictures of your license plates, and you don't know why, but you know you're being watched. But that's part of what happens. You know, you can't do anything about that. Nothing ever happened to me, but you know, there were other people that got in trouble.
Got in trouble how?
Well, for being, I mean, they were accused of doing things but never convicted, it seems, to the two people I'm thinking of. But it's just an accusation. I know that there was a time, I used to live in South Central LA, and when most of my life there, this is like in the 50s and 60s, I felt that the LAPD had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to. And people can believe that or not, but when you see it with your own eyes, then you really don't care whether people believe you or not, but you know what you've seen. And, it just, if you have problems, hopefully you can go to the police, but when they are the problem for you, then where do you go?
Absolutely. And that's still a question we're asking today, George. And you have one more photograph that I really love that's here. We could go to his next slide.
Yeah, well, see that, I'm not sure why I included this one, other than that, maybe it shows that if you're out there, you may have two people that are objecting to your being there, and that would be these two guys, and then the people behind them, the LAPD there behind them. You never know when you're going to get it. I know I've been, I was at a demonstration down there on Wilshire where the courthouse is, and there were white supremacists there, and yeah, but you have to approach carefully. I mean, I took pictures of them, and but you have to kind of know your boundaries. It's just like Ted was saying, you're the fly on the wall, but it takes time. I mean, you have something inbred that knows to what extent you can push something. I know when I was shooting the walkouts, I never had press credentials other than credentials that put you on the red carpet or something. But when you're out there shooting demonstrations, you have to, there's certain things you can do, certain things you cannot do, because you're not allowed, and you wonder why. And I've been told you got to leave, and then there's other people taking pictures, and I'm just wondering why me, But you never know. You don't want to push it because from one moment to the next, it can get dangerous. But for me, I was thinking about the danger in doing what we do, and I was thinking I've been in more dangerous situations shooting a rock and roll concert than some of these demonstrations.
Wow, I'd like to bring everybody in now to talk about some of these situations, because I know that everyone else has a familiar war story, if you will, that they can probably share. So I'd like to invite everyone to join us at this time. We have a lot of questions coming in too. Let's see. Okay, hi everyone. Let's see. My first question, I think, as I look at the body of everyone's work side by side, is how do you want the public to interpret images these days from professionals? I hear a lot in the journalism school that anyone can be a photographer now because of Instagram and filters. And as a professional, I know it takes a lot more than that. So what do you say to people who have a different relationship now with professional photographers now that they think they can do it too?
Well, can I talk? Am I okay?
Sure. Sure.
Anyway, yeah, it all depends on where you are. So that's the time now where people talking about being lucky being a photographer. Well, you don't get lucky ever, to get to that point where you're there with your camera. But today you may get lucky because there you are right in front of something that's extremely important, and you have your phone, and you're going to get something that the quality is going to be reasonably good if you know how to use your phone. And so I think that's the difference. Like I know today, if I'm hearing the news and I hear about something, I know we're going to see it, regardless of where it happened. And I think that's great. But here's one thing too, that for a long while, I felt photography was not necessarily an art because you're just clicking your camera. But then I come to know that it can be. It's rare, but definitely like what we're seeing here today, every now and then you'll shoot something that is almost a masterpiece because of the technically it's right on, and it's rare that you were there to get that. So I was wrong about, you know, photography being an art form. It can be, definitely be, but not always, you know, occasionally. But
yeah, and I agree with George, and I definitely concur with what Alex was talking about, where the photographer had a real narrative where he cut the faces off of the attackers and left the victims, you know, to be shown. And I think rarely does a citizen journalist have that type of narrative, other than just jamming a camera and hoping to get something. And traditionally, people with cameras, like citizen journalists, there's a few good ones and they know who they are and they do a good job, but mostly they're not very good at what they do. And you can probably see that on the news when they show 11 o'clock news, oh, this explosion happened, and it, you know, there's a photo, and then the explosion happens and the cameras jump, but a professional is just gonna hold it there, and, you know. So, I mean, it's not always that thing that I'm talking about, but it's where a professional has a great narrative and, you know, could tell a story, and a non-professional may get lucky with the handheld device, but they're really not acting like, you know, with the photographer's knowledge, which takes a long time to develop. And, you know, Alex's photos that he showed of Mr. Brittin's work is just, you know, I was looking at them and just go, wow, I know he was just taking one picture at a time. And a lot of times I'm standing next to people, you know, with cameras, and you hear I have a camera that does 20 frames per second, and you hear people doing 20 frames per second. I'm like, what are you taking photos of? And, but, you know, photographers like George, you know, one frame, quick, I got it, you know.
I'll jump in here and say that there certainly seems to be an art form to what Charles Brittin and what I believe both of you are doing. And I couldn't show everything that I've looked at in the archive, but context sheets really do tell a story, not about just what was happening at the event, but how he as a photographer was trying to find that masterpiece, to use your word, George. And I really do think that there's something certainly skillful about navigating a protest, which I think we all understand to be, it's not a controlled space, it's not a controlled event, right? He doesn't have any control over how things are, you know, happening, but being able to go in there and find that image is really important. And that doesn't at all change what is also important today about the importance of the amateur smartphone photographer, and how that person is really giving us information that we don't necessarily see from the news articles. So it's both at this, you know, I feel like they're both kind of in conversation with each other, but certainly what you guys are doing really places an emphasis on the artfulness of protest photography, if we can say that much.
Yes, can you talk a little bit about the ethics of these skills that people have developed? I know that, for example, last summer, a lot of civilians, if you call them, were very upset by the fact that some journalists kind of came into their faces while they were protesting and started taking pictures, and they may have said, oh, I don't want to be, you know, photographed. And maybe the person ran away and came back again, but said, well, your sign is really great, so I'm going to take a picture of you anyway, because legally they could. And I guess a lot of that resistance that I've heard comes from people being afraid that folks will retaliate against them later, as George was talking about earlier. What kind of advice do you have people who are going to participate in these public demonstrations, which we have a right to photograph, but maybe want to tell the photographer that they don't want to be immortalized in that way? There's a tension there. So have you ever had that happen to you? I guess this is for both George and Ted, in terms of people saying, erase that photograph of me. And what did you do? How did you handle those ethics when you legally had a right to be there, but someone absolutely didn't want to be captured?
Oh, go ahead, George.
Yeah, no, what came to mind right away is I was shooting for a disco magazine. This got nothing to do with politics, but in a disco, I was shooting for a disco magazine, and so they sent me to this disco in Hollywood, and I was taking pictures. And then I realized some of the people there didn't want their picture taken, and they were young, decent, really nice people, but they were really pissed off, and I felt very threatened then. So I went to the manager. I said, do they know I'm taking pictures? And he said, yeah, we posted it. But then at the door, they had this tiny little page. But like I said, the danger I've had before, like being in a crowd at a concert where you're in the middle of the audience, and then you start moving like the ocean. You're one of a lot of people, and it starts to sway, and that's dangerous. But also, I recall one time shooting a teeny bopper concert, and I was in front, and there's like 1,000 young girls, and one of the mothers has lost her child, and she grabbed me by the neck, and she's asking me to tell them to stop the concert, stop the music. And anyway, that's at times I felt threatened. But at demonstrations, I think you kind of feel your way, and you know what you can get away with, and you don't go into danger. I mean, you don't. Nothing has really been that important to me to where you can get seriously hurt. So.
Yeah, and I concur with George.
Oh, we have a question in the chat. Oh, go ahead, Ted.
Oh, I concur with George. But
ahead, Ted.
overall,
Sorry.
I would like to tell the public, not to stop the press from or involve, to stopping us from taking photos, because what you will get is a vision that maybe you think you're being, your picture's gonna end up in the FBI database or something, but what you're really creating is a mild form of censorship, and you're not trusting us to, take your photo, because most people can't see like a photographer. So when they see a camera, it's obviously like an intrusive device, but what we see is totally different when we see them. And it's just these two different mentalities mixing up, and there's usually conflict. But I would say if there's a press photographer in your face, ignore them, but don't engage and don't yell at them. And I mean, that's how I feel. But we have a chain of where our photos go through. We're kind of like the collectors of images and news. And then it goes through a series of editors and a gauntlet of information to where we finally decide what ends up in the publication. So we're not necessarily the beginning and end of what, we take photos of. So, be patient with us. And if you truly do feel, like you're in danger, maybe, be kinder about it. But we get a lot of people would just get in our faces with this, and on any side. It's not just left or right, but it's every protest now. It's getting kind of dangerous. So we're not the enemy.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah,
I've heard
really,
a lot of photographers say that last summer. Alex, this question is for you directly from the chat. This person wants to know, how do you balance Brittin's photography and his intentions then with what we know now about the outcome of the civil rights movement? And it says, you mentioned reports from the demonstrations Brittin was present. Can you talk about how you navigate balancing reports of the time and your own reading of the images as it's understood today?
It's a great question. So yes, looking back at the newspaper reports, what I can find in like a microfiche has been a very interesting engagement with what Brittin eventually produced on behalf of CORE. And I'll say this much, I don't yet know exactly where the images that I've shared today appeared. I can assume that they appeared in a CORE pamphlet or some type of informational brochure on behalf of the organization. But it's what's striking to me about the difference between what you would see in a newspaper versus what I see in the Brittin archive is that newspapers are very much interested in giving you a wide angle, kind of top level overview of what a demonstration in downtown Los Angeles can look like. And I think that Brittin, because of his relationship to the radical organizing and because specifically who he was working on behalf of, he really takes his camera down to that level that I was trying to mentioned earlier, and gives us these very haunting and close and intimate portrayals of what protesters were enduring vis-a-vis the police. And so the difference to me is on the level of macro versus micro almost, in terms of how we are representing the reality of protest. I hope that answers that question for them.
It does, and I think we have time for one more. Let's see. Have either of you, this is for George and Ted, covered any protests that you may be against on a personal level? And how'd you handle that?
Well, in my case, you know, I definitely have my opinions, and yeah, I don't, again, getting back to the farm workers, when I got an assignment to go up to Delano and spend some time with Cesar Chavez and the great boycott, of course, you know, I feel that I was in favor, of course, the farm workers getting everything they need, you know, because they're totally on the bottom of the pile always, and nothing ever changes for them. So, and then when you see your president creating a photo op eating grapes, you know, then you know that's not right. I don't know. Also, I was thinking that again, the danger of taking photos is a lot of people, they feel you're immigration, and they don't want their pictures taken, and so, and that's sort of an honest, you know, accusation. I don't know, but yeah, no, I definitely, you know, most of the time I think I have an opinion on whatever I've been shooting. But today, everybody has an opinion. You know, I think some people have come out of the cracks, and so they have opinions. But anyway.
What about you, Ted? Have you ever had to shoot a protest that you didn't agree with?
Oh yeah, all the time. But as a freelancer, I could pick and choose events and protest demonstrations that I want to cover. And I generally try not to waste my time on covering things that, unless it's a grassroots movement, like possibly like a right-wing activity. And I think most photographers feel the same way. We were talking about this earlier, that most photojournalists don't go into photojournalism to promote or to have strong opinions of like fascism, or that want to be white supremacists and get a white supremacist or a hard right kind of viewpoint out there. Most photojournalists are kind of people of the earth and connected, you know, on some sort of a Jungian way, and know and want to show the stories that are often not photographed and covered, you know, like Salgado and Eugene Smith and Eugene Richards now. And so generally, I think most photographers cover and do things that they feel strongly about anyway, and not per se promote them, but just get the voice out, because a lot of things that we covered, and I know what George covered, you know, didn't get a lot of people listening to them. And that's why these things happened. You know, these events are, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, people weren't listening to, you know, what was happening. And now you have everybody's ear on it because of the press is there. So don't vilify the press for, you know, getting this word out. And even with George, you know, like no uvas, like before that came out, nobody would know what you're talking about. But to this day, you know, I won't eat grapes anymore, and, you know, but, you know, as a freelancer, I have that luxury to say, no, I don't want to cover, you know, something that, you know, I don't feel strongly about.
Wow. And yeah, we have in the chat as our last question, this is for everyone. There's a lot of young photographers who are aspiring, who are asking questions about how to get started, especially if they want to use their photography to draw awareness to things or evoke change. What advice do each of you have for them?
Well, I was thinking about that just now, is how, like with Ted and myself, I don't know that we initially began to become photojournalists. It just, in my case, it's just something that happened. But I think once you're familiar with your camera and what you're doing, then you do it for yourself. You know, the best things that I have, I think, are because I wanted to be there, not because I was assigned to go there. It's just because you want to expose things that are happening, if only for yourself. A great deal of what I have was because I felt I mean, when I was younger, I got the thought that I'm going to do a book someday. So that's why I shot a lot of what I did. So I'm so glad that I had that in mind, because I was shooting things that didn't matter then, but are extremely important now.
Yeah, definitely. And I would suggest, you know, have a camera with you everywhere you go. You should always have a camera everywhere you go if you want to be a photojournalist. But, you know, you could learn in school how to operate a camera perfectly and to take, learn the rules of photography, but it's more of a call. I think we spoke about this before. It's, you know, like it calls to you and eventually you find yourself, and it's almost like somebody that goes into a religious order, you know, it takes over your life. And most photojournalists are pretty special people, and they dedicated every ounce of their living energy to photojournalism. So if you find yourself questioning yourself or not really like 100% into it, you're not going to do very well, because most photojournalists will give more than is necessary to cover an event or a story. And it takes over your life in a good way, of course. And I love it. I know George loves it. And you have to give it your all to be great, because it is a profession that draws in some of the best photographers and best people.
I'd like to just advocate on behalf of the researchers, though I'm not myself a photographer, that I would encourage folks out there to look for resources like the ones that I'm showing today from the GRI, investigate other photographers who live in special collections or who live in library collections in your city, because I think that they give a wonderful example of, and George and Ted both do this as well, wonderful examples of what photography can look like, especially if you're trying to be on the ground during social protest movements. So I can provide, for anyone who would like to reach out to me, I can provide more examples of what those resources look like, but try to get to know the photographers who have come before you as well, because the things that I've shown today are just a small glimpse of a very large collection of photographs that Brittin was able to shoot over his career. And it's very impressive work. And I'm sure both is true for Ted and George as well.
Well, you know, two of my faves right now are Carolyn Cole and Marcus Yam. And in yesterday's LA Times, I think it was on the front page, there's an incredible shot by Marcus Yam. And when I see something like that, before I see the credit, I just feel it's one of those two that have done that, you know, because they're so incredible. And Ted.
Wow. And Ted, yeah.
Thank you.
And this is, I just thank you all for documenting these moments, because they happen very quickly. And as you all said, they can start out one way and end another. And to be at the heart of that, to help us chart time and really show us that we have made change, even when it seems slow or even when it seems discouraging, I feel is the work of a photojournalist. So I thank you for your time today, and thank you for getting a chance to speak about some of your most iconic photographs that have ended up in books, on magazine covers, and in Alex's instance, curated so carefully and lovingly so that we can track all the people who came before us and those who've yet to come. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.